I seriously considered fleeing a city barefoot in the rain? I was standing in the marble lobby of the Ashcroft Hotel at 11:42 at night, while the front desk clerk smiled at me with the strained pity of a woman who had already repeated the same sentence too many times. Behind her, a chandelier glittered over polished stone, and beyond the revolving doors, Philadelphia looked smeared in silver from the storm. "I'm very sorry," she said, tapping at her keyboard one last time as if I might be rescued by a miracle she'd somehow forgotten to check. The symposium block only retained one active reservation after the booking error. "We've called every partner property within 10 miles. The weather has stranded half the city. I have one room left." Beside me, Ione Halden closed her umbrella with neat, efficient movements and said nothing. The problem with silence, when it belongs to the person who irritates you most on earth, is that it becomes its own kind of provocation. Before continuing with the video, check out my Patreon page in the description to access some pretty explicit and uncensored GL stories that aren't shared on YouTube. Warning: the videos there are very steamy. "One room," I repeated, because sometimes saying disaster out loud makes it less absurd. "For both of us." The clerk gave me an apologetic nod. "And there isn't?" I asked, already knowing there wasn't. "A second bed situation hidden in your heart?" Something almost like amusement flickered in her eyes. "There is a king bed, Miss Penn." Of course there was. I turned slowly to look at Ione. She was still damp from the rain, dark hair gathered low at the nape of her neck, charcoal coat buttoned to the throat, expression composed in that infuriating way of hers that suggested inconvenience should simply feel ashamed in her presence and correct itself. A bead of rain had caught at the curve of her jaw. Her mouth was neutral. Her gaze, when it met mine, was unreadable. "We can ask for extra blankets," she said. I actually laughed. It came out high and dangerous. "That is your contribution?" "It is a practical contribution." Her tone stayed cool, but I knew her well enough by then to hear the small strain under it. "Unless you plan to sleep in the lobby with the hydrangeas." "Don't tempt me." Professor Sethi, who was supposed to have arrived 3 hours earlier and handled all logistical disasters by wielding both charm and institutional guilt, was currently trapped at LaGuardia with 42 delayed academics and, according to his last message, a morally compromised vending machine. The university travel office had somehow merged or erased or transformed our room reservations into a single booking. The National Colloquium on Ethics and Public Leadership had drawn half the East Coast into the same hotel. Outside, the storm was swallowing cabs whole. Every sensible escape route had dissolved. The clerk slid 2 key cards across the marble. I stared at them as if they were evidence in a criminal trial. If you had told me 18 months earlier that I would one day stand in a luxury hotel lobby in wet boots, furious at the universe, and realize that the woman I least trusted would be sleeping within arm's reach of me, I would have called you deranged. If you had told me that the thought of it would ignite something far more dangerous than annoyance low in my stomach, I would have walked away from the conversation on principle. Because Ione Halden and I did not share air willingly, much less a bed. That was the official story anyway. The unofficial story was more humiliating. We met in Professor Sethi's seminar on constitutional rhetoric on a Monday, so bright it felt personally mocking. Bramwell's Humanities building had those tall, impossible windows that made every student look either angelic or sleep-deprived. I arrived 8 minutes late because the bus from my side of town had broken down near the river, and I came in carrying too many books, apologizing breathlessly, only to find the only empty seat was directly across from a woman I recognized by reputation and had never actually spoken to. Ione Halden looked up as I sat down. Not glanced. Looked. There are people whose attention feels like a hand at the back of the neck. Hers did. She wore a cream blouse under a black jacket, hair pinned up, fountain pen uncapped over a legal pad. Everything about her suggested order. I was still trying to flatten my curls and extract a highlighter from the inside pocket of a coat that had eaten it. When Professor Sethi asked for positions on the week's reading, civil disobedience, moral theater, the difference between lawfulness and justice, I answered too quickly, because being poor at pretending not to care has always been one of my defining traits. I argued that institutional reverence is often just fear dressed nicely, that legality has never been a reliable test for morality, and that anyone who talks about patience from the safe side of power should be made to sit down and learn the meaning of urgency from people who cannot afford delay. Professor Sethi beamed at me like I was a match he'd been hoping someone would strike. Then Ione said, "That would be more persuasive if you weren't confusing moral clarity with rhetorical indulgence." The room went still. I turned to her. "I beg your pardon?" "You're right about unjust systems," she said, maddeningly calm. "You're wrong to imagine that anger alone makes an argument structurally sound. If your point can't survive scrutiny, it doesn't become brave by getting louder. I should tell you I am not at my best when publicly challenged by beautiful women before noon." "What an elegant way to defend complacency," I said. A couple of people inhaled. Professor Sethi looked delighted. Ione's gaze did not leave mine. "No. It's an elegant way to say that if you want to dismantle power, you should know exactly where to strike." That was the beginning. Not the kind beginning. Not the romantic beginning people prefer in stories they tell later, once everything has softened enough to survive retelling. There was no dropped pen, no sudden sunlight, no impossible instant certainty. There was only the sharp, electric shock of recognition. She wasn't dismissing me. She was meeting me at full force. I didn't know what to do with the exhilaration of that, so I translated it into combat. By the end of the seminar, we had argued through precedent, protest, procedure, narrative framing, the ethics of disruption, and whether fury becomes more or less useful when refined. Professor Sethi cut us off 10 minutes past the hour with the dreamy expression of a man who had just watched his favorite opera performed for free. As I stuffed my books into my bag, still vibrating with indignation, Ione said, very quietly, "Your point about urgency was the strongest one in the room." I looked up. "You just spent 40 minutes trying to kill it." "I spent 40 minutes making it harder to dismiss." And then she left before I could decide whether to thank her or throw something. That was how it went with us. Nothing simple survived contact. I took one of the key cards. "Fine," I said, "but if you so much as breathe condescendingly in my direction, I'm reporting you to the symposium committee." Ione's mouth tipped at one corner, very slightly. "I'll do my best to breathe in a manner acceptable to you, Leora." My name in her voice was its own weather event. Low, precise, almost dry. It always seemed to arrive with the implication that she had already measured me more carefully than I would like. I hated that it worked on me. I hated, too, that even in a hotel lobby at midnight, with my hair frizzing from rain and my patience hanging by a thread, I noticed details. The line of her throat above the collar of her coat. The pale gold glint of the watch her father had given her after winning the Haldane Prize. The faint scent of rainwater and clean cedar when she stepped closer to take her suitcase. The silver fountain pen clipped inside the pocket of her blazer, because of course she had changed into a blazer for a travel day, while the rest of us looked like we'd escaped a commuter train disaster. She thanked the clerk. I did not. One of us had been raised impeccably. One of us had been raised by a librarian mother who considered muttering darkly about institutions to be a valid emotional outlet. We crossed the lobby in silence. My suitcase wheels rattled over the marble. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and we stepped inside together. Just the two of us and the reflected version of whatever this was. In the mirrored wall, we looked like a study in contradictions. I was rain-flushed and restless, with curls slipping from the clip at the back of my head, scarf half untied, conference folder tucked under my arm like a weapon. Ione looked as if she had been painted there deliberately. All clean lines, dark lashes, controlled posture. One hand on the handle of her suitcase, the other resting lightly at her side. Elegant, intimidating, unfairly beautiful. She caught me looking. I looked away first. The elevator rose. "You can take the bed," she said. I turned so fast my scarf swung. "What?" "The bed. I'll take the chair or the floor if the chair is impossible." Something hot and immediate flared in me, because I was tired, because she was impossible, because generosity from her always felt like being outmaneuvered. "I don't need martyrdom from you." "It isn't martyrdom." "It sounds suspiciously like it." Her eyes moved to my face. "You've been awake since 5. Your train was canceled, your poster tube cracked, and you've spent the last 2 hours pretending you aren't limping from where you twisted your ankle running across the station concourse." "I'm making a logistical suggestion." The air changed. She knew about my ankle. I hadn't told her. I hadn't told anyone because admitting pain in front of Ione Halden would have felt like offering a rival a sharpened blade. I folded my arms. "Why do you know that?" A pause. Then very evenly, "You favor your left side when you're trying not to." The elevator went silent enough for me to hear the pulse in my own ears. There it was again, the thing that always unsettled me more than her sharpness ever had. Not that she challenged me. I could challenge back. Not that she won things. I won things too. It was the way she noticed, the way details about me seemed to lodge somewhere behind that cool expression and stay there. The way she could glance once and somehow know if I was lying about being fine. The doors opened onto the 12th floor before I could answer. I stepped out first, because retreat sometimes looks better if you call it momentum. Our room was at the end of the corridor, facing the city. The carpet muffled our footsteps. Somewhere far below, traffic hissed through wet streets. I swiped the keycard with more force than necessary. The little green light blinked, the door opened, and there it was. One bed. Very large, very white, very impossible. For a moment, neither of us moved. The room was elegant in the impersonal way expensive places always are: cream walls, brass lamp, velvet chair by the window, a desk scattered with embossed stationery, heavy curtains half open to a glittering, wet skyline. The king bed occupied the center, like an accusation. On the bedside table sat a glass bottle of water and 2 short tumblers, as if the universe enjoyed irony. Ione set her suitcase down first. "Well," she said. I laughed again, softer this time, because what else was there to do? If the building catches fire overnight, I want it on record that I died offended. That almost smile returned. Brief. Gone. Duly noted. I should tell you now that Ione Halden was not born cruel. That came later, or perhaps what looked like cruelty in her was more often defense polished to a mirror shine. At the time, though, I mostly knew what everyone else knew. She came from a family so formidable that professors used her surname like punctuation. She was first in our year, captain of the advocacy team, frighteningly articulate even when half asleep, and somehow capable of making a simple black turtleneck look like a strategic act of war. She rarely raised her voice. She never gossiped. She seemed to regard praise as a scheduling inconvenience. People either wanted to impress her or wanted to survive her. Occasionally, both. I had spent most of 2 years trying very hard not to want anything from her at all. It would have been easier if she had actually hated me. Instead, she challenged me in seminars with surgical precision, remembered obscure cases I'd mentioned offhand weeks earlier, and once, during a snowstorm, wordlessly handed me her gloves outside the library because mine were wet through. Then the next day, she had gone back to skewering my argument on statutory overreach in front of 20 people, as if generosity had been a clerical error. She operated like that. One impossible contradiction after another. I put my bag on the luggage stand and walked toward the window. Below us, the city looked lacquered and luminous, streets blazing gold through rain. My reflection hovered faintly over the glass, all dark curls and annoyance, and the kind of exhaustion that makes every feeling louder. Professor Sethi says he'll sort everything tomorrow, I said, mostly to the window. He also said the vending machine has become ideological, Ione replied, removing her coat. I turned before I could stop myself. The blazer underneath was midnight blue. Her sleeves were rolled once from the wrist. Her hair, loosened by rain, had begun to slip in soft, dark strands around her face. For one treacherous second, I forgot how to manage my own body. There are forms of weakness that never show up in transcripts. This was mine. She glanced up. What? Nothing. Convincing. I exhaled. You cannot be this calm about the fact that we are sharing a bed. That depends, she said. Am I meant to panic decoratively? I tried not to smile and failed, which annoyed me more than if she had insulted me outright. This, too, was part of the problem. Our worst arguments were edged with banter, because somewhere under the rivalry, there had always been a rhythm. Something quick and charged and uncomfortably alive. Even when we made each other furious, some thread between us tightened instead of snapping. I dropped into the velvet chair and began unlacing my boots with more concentration than necessary. My ankle objected the second I bent it. A sharp pull climbed my calf. Ione noticed. Of course she did. Sit still, she said. I am sitting still. You're wincing dramatically. It's not dramatic if it hurts. She crouched before I could object. One knee touched the carpet. Her hands, long-fingered, deft, far steadier than mine had any right to be after 12 hours of travel, closed lightly around my boot. The world became very small. Ione, if you yank at it, you'll make the swelling worse. Her voice had dropped. The room felt suddenly overlit. Every nerve I possessed rushed to the surface. She loosened the laces, eased the boot off, and set it aside with clinical care. But there was nothing clinical about my pulse. Her fingers brushed my socked ankle, and I had to grip the chair arms not to do something humiliating, like gasp. It's not bad, she murmured, studying the joint. A slight twist. You sound pleased. I sound relieved. Before I could decode that, she stood and crossed to the bathroom. When she returned, she held a hand towel wrapped around ice from the bucket. She knelt again without asking and settled the makeshift compress against my ankle. I looked at her bowed head, at the dark shine of her hair beneath the lamp, at the concentration in her face, and felt something old and unmanageable stir awake beneath the anger I'd gotten so good at carrying. The truth, which I was nowhere near ready to admit that night, was that rivalry is an intimate language. To be opposed by someone intelligent is to be studied by them. To be challenged again and again by the same person is to live in the field of their attention. For almost 2 years, Ione had been in mine like weather at the horizon, sometimes distant, sometimes devastating, always changing the shape of the day. And I had never once understood what she wanted from me. Not in the seminar room where we first collided. Not at the winter reception where she watched another woman touch my wrist and went so still I thought the air around her might crack. Not on the library steps 3 months later when she handed me a marked-up copy of an article I'd been desperate to read and said, without meeting my eyes, "You'll need pages 14 through 19, then disappeared into the rain before I could thank her. People think desire announces itself dramatically. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it arrives as observation, as irritation that burns too hot, as the ridiculous certainty that you can identify a person from across a crowded lecture hall by the angle of her shoulders alone. I had known the slope of Ione Halden's handwriting before I knew the sound of her laugh. And I knew, even then, kneeling there on the hotel carpet with cold wrapped around my ankle and restraint written into every line of her body, that this night was going to undo something I had spent too long pretending was still intact. Room service arrived under silver cloches and institutional discretion. The young man wheeling it in looked from me to Ione to the one bed and achieved a level of professional blankness I deeply respected. When the door closed behind him, I burst out laughing with the kind of hysteria exhaustion produces. What? Ione asked, setting plates on the table by the window. He thinks we're either newlyweds or murder suspects. Given your face in the lobby, I'd say he's leaning toward murder suspects. That is unfair. I was charming. You threatened to report my breathing. In my defense, your breathing is extremely provocative. The silence that followed was so immediate and charged that I wanted to climb inside the carpet and never emerge. Ione set down my water glass a fraction too carefully. I meant condescending, I said. I know. Her voice did not sound entirely convinced that she wished she knew. We ate at the small round table by the window because neither of us was brave enough to sit on the bed while pretending none of this was strange. Rain ticked softly against the glass. Philadelphia glittered below us, all wet gold and red brake lights and river-dark distances. The room smelled faintly of truffle from the pasta and the cedar note of Ione's perfume, which I had always pretended not to know by heart. For several minutes, we confined ourselves to safe topics: tomorrow's schedule, the revised speaking order, whether Professor Sethi would ever forgive the symposium for existing without him in it. Then Ione said, without looking up, "Ameline is my cousin's friend." I nearly dropped my fork. What? She took a sip of water. At the donor dinner, you looked ready to set the floral arrangements on fire. I assumed you were wondering. I stared at her, scandalized by the accuracy. I was not. You were. I was wondering why she kept touching your arm like she was auditioning for private financing. That made her laugh. Not a polite exhale. Not the brief, dry sound I had heard once or twice when Professor Sethi made a rare joke sharp enough to amuse her. A real laugh. Low, surprised, warm enough to take the room and rearrange it. I forgot how to be offended. Ameline was trying, she said, still a little amused, to convince me to attend a foundation dinner my father wanted me at. She touches everyone's arm when she thinks it will help. I set my fork down slowly. Your father wanted you there? He wants me in many places I have no desire to be. Something in the phrasing snagged at me. You don't have to talk about him. Her eyes lifted. I didn't say I wouldn't. No, but you sounded like you regretted mentioning him at all. That may simply be the effect he has. The room fell quiet again. Outside, the storm had softened to a steady shimmer. Headlights streaked the avenue 12 floors below. Ione pushed her empty plate away and folded her hands, then unfolded them again. It was the first restless movement I'd seen from her all evening. Did you truly think I sabotaged your essay? She asked. The bluntness of it made my throat tighten. I could have lied. We were both talented liars when dignity demanded it. But something about the room, how enclosed it was, how close, how the city seemed suspended outside like a witness, made lying feel childish. For a while, I admitted. She nodded once, as if confirming a private wound. I wondered. I was angry. So was I. That startled me. You? A slight lift of one shoulder. You thought the worst of me very quickly. Because you make it easy sometimes. I know. A pause. But it still hurt. No one had ever accused Iona Halden of gentleness, least of all me. Yet she said that with no performance at all, no sharp edge to protect it. Just fact. I looked down at my hands. I'm sorry. She watched me for a long moment. Thank you. The air between us changed again. Less combative, more dangerous. I thought you looked at me and saw someone noisy and underprepared and embarrassingly earnest, I said, because once truth starts moving, it rarely stops where you planned. Like I irritated you on principle. A faint crease appeared between her brows. Is that what you think of yourself? No, I said. That's what I think people like you think of people like me. People like me? You know what I mean. I'm not certain I do. I pushed my water glass in a small, restless circle. You move through the world like it was built with your proportions in mind. Something flickered in her face. Not amusement, not offense, something sadder. It wasn't, she said quietly. I met her gaze then, and because I was tired enough to be reckless, I kept it. I could have asked. I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I said, "For the record, you irritated me too." That is a relief. Mutual humiliation feels fairer. This time I laughed, and the sound loosened something in both of us. After dinner, we turned to practicalities with the solemnity of diplomats negotiating a minor border dispute. Shower order, alarm times, which half of the bed constituted neutral territory. Ione volunteered to take the window side. I accused her of strategic nobility. She informed me that my accusations were becoming repetitive. I told her to be grateful I was too tired for originality. When I opened my suitcase, I discovered that the rain leaking through the station roof had dampened half my clothes, including the soft black sleep shirt I'd packed. I stared at the cold fabric in mute betrayal. "You're kidding," I said. Ione glanced over from the desk, where she was typing notes into her laptop. "What?" "My bag is staging a revolt." She stood, crossed the room, and took one look at the inside of my suitcase. "That's inconvenient." That is the blandest word available for this situation. A tiny smile touched her mouth. Then she opened her own case, pulled out a white cotton button-down I had seen her wear under blazers at least 10 times, and held it toward me. I stared at it. Ione. "It's clean." "Yes, that is somehow not the issue." Her hand remained extended. "Would you rather sleep in wet clothes?" The honest answer was that I would rather be struck by lightning than admit what wearing her shirt might do to me. The less honest answer was all I had available. "This feels like a trap." "It's a shirt, Leora." I am aware of the broad category. A quieter expression settled over her face. Take it." There are requests, and then there are moments when a person says 2 words and somehow strips all the wit from your bloodstream. I took the shirt. Our fingers brushed. That should not have mattered as much as it did. We had passed books, pages, pens, annotated drafts. We had stood shoulder to shoulder at lecterns and across tables and beside the coffee station in the law annex. But the intimacy of borrowed clothing is specific, impossible to misunderstand. It smelled faintly of starch and something darker underneath. Cedar, black tea, Ione herself. I fled to the bathroom before my expression could betray me. In the mirror, I looked a little unhinged. Rain-frizzed curls, flushed cheeks, eyes too bright. I leaned both hands on the sink and inhaled slowly. This was ridiculous. It was a shirt. It was her shirt. I changed into it anyway. The sleeves swallowed my hands until I rolled them twice. The hem brushed mid-thigh. I splashed cold water on my face, then stood there one extra, treacherous moment with my eyes closed, breathing in the faint trace of her perfume from the collar. When I came out, Ione was by the window loosening the clasp of one gold earring. She looked up and stopped. If I live to be 90, I will remember that expression. Not because it was theatrical, the opposite, because all her careful composure simply vanished for one bare second. Her gaze moved over me and stayed there, stunned and dark and unguarded in a way I had never seen, and the force of being looked at like that nearly folded me in half. "You were right," I said, because I needed language, or I would combust. "It is, objectively speaking, a shirt." She let out a breath so quiet it barely counted as sound. "Yes." That was not convincing. "No," she said, still looking at me. "It wasn't." My pulse went feral. I crossed to the bed and sat because my legs had become unreliable. Ione turned away long enough to gather her things and disappear into the bathroom. When the door clicked shut, I put both hands over my face and counted backward from 10 like a woman trying not to have a full spiritual crisis in a hotel room. The problem with wanting someone disciplined is that when their restraint slips, even slightly, it feels catastrophic. She emerged 15 minutes later with damp hair loose over her shoulders and a black sleep top that should have been unremarkable, and was absolutely not. The room had become too small for dignity. I was sitting against the headboard with our presentation notes open on my lap, because pretending to work seemed marginally safer than acknowledging that we were both freshly showered, exhausted, and a few feet from sleeping in the same bed. Ione dried the last of the water from her hair with a towel, then glanced at the notes. You're revising section 3. You use too much passive voice when you're tired. That is slander. It is pattern recognition. She came to sit beside me, not too close, and leaned in to read. Our shoulders nearly touched. The mattress shifted under her weight. Her hair was still damp enough that I caught a cleaner, softer version of her scent. My heart became an unreliable narrator. You've replaced public confidence is diminished with public confidence is betrayed, she said. It's truer. It's also less diplomatically survivable. We are not applying for jobs at a monarchy. No, she said, just fellowships funded by people who dislike being told hard truths at breakfast. I grinned despite myself. And yet you still picked me as co-presenter. That was not a democratic process. You could have objected. I didn't want to. The words landed between us with more weight than they should have been allowed. I turned my head. She had not. Her eyes stayed on the page, but I could see the line of her throat move when she swallowed. Why not? I asked quietly. Now she turned. I have tried several times since to explain what it was like to be looked at by Ione Halden when she stopped pretending we were only rivals. I have failed every time. It was not softness exactly. It was too intense for that. Not hunger alone either, though there was hunger in it. It was recognition without armor, the terrible relief of being undeniable. Because, she said, you are the only person here who never lets me become lazy. I could have made a joke. I almost did. Instead, I asked, is that the only reason? No. The room throbbed with silence. I waited. Ione looked away first and closed the folder gently. We should sleep. It was such a flagrant retreat that, on another night, I would have fought her on principle. But there was a brittleness in her voice I had learned not to ignore. I nodded. We arranged pillows down the middle of the bed in a gesture both comical and doomed. I turned off the lamp on my side. She switched off hers. Darkness settled around us, softened by city light leaking through the curtains. Rain whispered against the window. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed, and then all became muffled again. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, acutely aware of the shape of another person beside me. After a while, Ione said, into the dark, "You talk in your sleep during finals." I turned my head so fast my hair caught on the pillow. What? I've heard you in the library nap room. You have not. You once muttered, and I quote, "If anyone cites Hobbes one more time, I'll bite them." I groaned. That is private information. I found it endearing. That word, in the dark, almost undid me. You are an alarming person, I whispered. So I've been told. Silence again. Softer now, less defensive. Then, because nights like that seem designed to pry open the hidden parts of you with patient fingers, I heard myself say, "Why were you crying in the moot chamber?" The stillness beside me changed instantly. I could feel her wakefulness sharpen in the dark. "I'm sorry," I said before she answered. "That was intrusive. I shouldn't have asked. I saw you by accident and I never said anything, and it has been living in the back of my mind ever since." For several long seconds, she didn't speak. I wondered if I had ruined everything. If the careful, strange trust of the evening would shatter cleanly and we would go back to barbs and polished distance by morning. Then Ione said, very quietly, "My mother used to call me from airports." I did not move. She traveled constantly when I was younger. Museums, archives, lectures, other people's beautiful cities. My father hated it. I used to think that made her glamorous. A pause. Later, I understood she was leaving long before she actually left. The rain against the window sounded louder. She went to Vienna for a conference when I was 15 and didn't come back for 6 months. When she did, it was brief and awkward, and full of apologies I couldn't digest quickly enough to forgive. After that, everything in our house became performance. My father worked later. I became very good. She telephoned from hotels and promised visits that turned into delays. Her voice thinned, just slightly. 3 years ago, she died in Copenhagen before we'd figured out how to speak honestly again. Pain moved through me so fast it felt like I'd swallowed it. Ione. She used to call me from airport lounges because those were the only places she sounded lonely enough to tell the truth. I could hear now how carefully she was breathing. That night in the moot chamber was the anniversary of her last voicemail. My brother sent it to me by mistake when he was clearing documents. I listened to it and behaved rather less elegantly than usual. There are moments when language becomes a poor instrument. Anything I said risked sounding rehearsed or thin. So I did the only thing that felt honest. I turned onto my side. The pillow barrier lay between us like a joke too tired to continue. I slid it aside. The bed shifted. She did not move away. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Her face was mostly shadow, but the city light caught the gleam in her eyes. "She left often enough that everyone assumes the grief should be neat by now," she said, as if time teaches obedience. "It doesn't." "No." I hesitated. Then I reached across the small remaining distance and laid my hand over hers on the sheet. She went utterly still. Her fingers were cool. Then, slowly, they turned under mine and held on. Sometimes I think the whole story changed there. Not with a kiss, not with some grand declaration, just two women in a hotel room, after midnight, too tired to keep pretending touch meant nothing when everything else already did. "I didn't know," I said. "There are many things you don't know about me." Something almost like a smile touched my mouth, despite the ache in my chest. That sounded unbearably dramatic. "It was meant to." I squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. For a while, neither of us said anything. Then, because fairness matters more at night, and because she had handed me a truth so personal it deserved one in return, I said, "My father left when I was 10. Her thumb stilled against my knuckles. "He wasn't glamorous," I said, trying for humor and not entirely managing it. "No airports, no grand intellectual tragedy. He just kept promising he'd come to the weekend debate meets and then forgetting to arrive. One day he moved out and married a woman who collected ceramic birds." I've never recovered from how ordinary it was. Ione's grip tightened. "My mother did everything after that. Library shifts, community classes, coupon math. She made miracles feel like budgeting." I swallowed. I think I learned to be loud because quiet people were easier to leave. The confession hung between us, so raw it almost hummed. Ione said my name like she was afraid of bruising it. No one had ever sounded more careful with me. I waited. The city hummed beyond the glass. Her hand remained in mine, warm now. "You are never quiet because you are shallow," she said. "You are loud because you care. There's a difference." I laughed once, and to my embarrassment, it came out uneven. That sounded suspiciously like admiration. It was. The room seemed to tip. "Ione." She shut her eyes briefly, as if even this much honesty cost her something physical. When she opened them again, they were bright. "You asked me once why I keep doing things for you and then retreating," she said. I didn't answer because the answer was undignified. "Try me." Her mouth moved, not quite a smile. "I have been trying not to want you since the first week you argued with me in Sethi's seminar." I stopped breathing. She looked almost angry with herself now, as if truth were a trap she had finally stepped in after years of careful circling. "You walked in late, hair wet from rain, furious at a bus you described as philosophically hostile, and then you said the room was treating legality like a religion. No one ever talks to him like that in the first week. I thought you were reckless. Brilliant. Exasperating. A pause. Alive in a way I did not know how to be near. Something hot and devastating swept through me. You could have mentioned this before we were sharing a bed. Yes, that does seem like an oversight. I should have laughed. Instead, my vision blurred so abruptly it startled me. You've got to be kidding, I whispered. Her expression changed at once. Leora? I covered my eyes with my free hand, horrified. No, this is unbearable. I'm crying because you used complete sentences. I need the floor to open. Ione pushed herself up on one elbow, alarm and tenderness warring in her face. Hey. I shook my head because the alternative was admitting the scale of it. The years of misreading. The constant ache. The humiliating private hope I had carried like contraband. I thought you hated me, I said, voice breaking around the edges. Or worse, that you thought I was entertaining but not serious. That you looked at me and saw scholarship girl with too much volume and not enough polish. I kept trying to beat you because it was easier than admitting you mattered enough to ruin my whole day. A tear escaped despite my best efforts. I swore under my breath and tried to wipe it away. Ione caught my wrist gently before I could. No, she said, so fiercely it almost hurt. Never that. Her thumb brushed my cheek. One tear, then another. The touch was so careful it undid whatever composure I still possessed. I laughed again, mortified and watery and helpless all at once. This is deeply unattractive, I informed her. You are spectacular, she said. There are phrases that make a permanent home inside you. That was one of them. I stared at her through tears. You cannot just say that to people. I am discovering, she said, voice rough now too, that there are many things I apparently cannot do. I should have known then that she was close to breaking herself, because her control had gone strange around the edges. Too taut, too transparent. I lifted my hand and touched the line of her jaw, tentative only for the first heartbeat. She leaned into it with a quiet, devastating honesty that made my throat ache. Why did you keep your distance? I asked. If you felt any of this, why spend 2 years acting like a beautifully tailored threat? Her eyes fell shut for a second. When they opened, there was pain in them I hadn't seen fully until then. Because the last time I wanted a woman openly, she said, my father looked at me as if I had invited ruin into the house. I stayed very still. She was older, 6th form. Kind, impulsive, not built for secrecy. Ione's mouth twisted. I thought I could keep those parts of my life in separate rooms. I could not. When he found out, he spoke to me for 10 minutes in his study without once raising his voice. I would have preferred shouting. He simply explained what a poor choice it was, what it would cost, how temporary and foolish these attachments tend to be. Afterward, he paid my tuition bill and took me to dinner, as if discipline and affection were interchangeable. She swallowed. I became very good at not wanting anything visible. My chest hurt so sharply I had to breathe through it. And then I met you, she said, and you were visible in every possible way. A tear slipped down her face then. I saw it in the city light and felt something inside me split cleanly open. Without thinking, I moved closer. We were no longer separated by pillows or strategy or sensible distance. We were simply there, in the middle of a hotel bed, gone warm from our bodies, the night deep around us, her cheek damp under my hand. You are allowed to want things, I whispered. Something like grief crossed her face. Not safely. Then maybe safe is overrated. That made the faintest, saddest laugh escape her. You would say that. Because it's true. No, she said, and now her voice broke too. Because you're brave in ways I have been pretending not to envy. I kissed the tear from the corner of her cheek before I had time to decide whether I should. The room went perfectly still. I pulled back at once, pulse crashing in my ears. I'm sorry, I should have asked. Leora. The way she said my name stopped everything. Her hand came up to my face, fingers shaking. Actually shaking. The discovery of it nearly stole my breath. Ione Halden, composed to the point of myth, was trembling because I had touched her. Ask me now, she said. I searched her face. Do you want me to kiss you? Yes, she said, and the rawness in her voice would have been enough even without the answer itself. Please. There are kisses you remember for their technique, and kisses you remember because they alter your understanding of your own life. Ours was the second kind. It began gently, almost reverently, the first careful press of her mouth to mine, carrying so much restraint it felt like standing at the edge of something enormous and waiting to see whether it would hold. Then I made a small, helpless sound into the kiss, and all that carefulness cracked into longing. She kissed me like she had been starving elegantly for years. I had imagined kissing Ione often enough to be embarrassed by the number. None of my imaginings had come close. Her hand cradled the back of my neck as if I were breakable and beloved in the same breath. Mine slid into her loosened hair. Her mouth was warm, then urgent, then impossibly tender again when she felt me shake. Every pause between us felt charged enough to light the whole city. When we pulled back the first time, we stayed with our foreheads touching, breathing each other's air. This is a terrible idea, I whispered. Probably. I have never wanted anything more. Her breath hitched. That makes two of us. And then we were kissing again, deeper now, no less gentle for the fact that the restraint had given way. Her fingers traced my jaw, my throat, the collar of her shirt on my body as if she could not believe it was there. I touched the soft line of bare skin at her waist, where her top had ridden up, and felt her shudder. Tell me if you want me to stop, she said against my mouth. I will, I whispered. You too. I will. We moved slowly at first, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of what it meant. Everything felt earned and fragile and electric. The hotel room, with its 2 white sheets and distant stormlight, became the entire world. I kissed the corner of her mouth, the place beneath her ear, the pulse jumping at her throat. She made that low, undone sound again and hid her face in my neck for a moment, as if feeling this much might actually overwhelm her. You're shaking, I murmured. So are you. That seems fair. She laughed softly into my skin, and the sound was intimate enough to count as a confession. I have no intention of turning tenderness into spectacle by itemizing every touch that followed. Some things deserve to remain held close. What I can tell you is this. It was not frantic. It was not careless. It was built of all the hours before it, of sharpened arguments and stolen glances and jealousy and restraint, and the exhausted honesty of a room with no more exits. Her hands learned me like someone reading a language she had been waiting years to speak aloud. Mine traced the strict lines of her shoulders until they softened under my palms. We kissed until the tension between us turned liquid and warm and impossible to separate from trust. We paused to ask, to breathe, to look. Each time we did, the sight of her, hair mussed, mouth pink from kissing, eyes dark with feeling and not one trace of distance left in them, struck me with a sweetness so fierce it bordered on pain. At one point, I found myself laughing softly because the top button of her sleep shirt had gotten stuck in my hair. She looked stricken. Have I injured you? Only my pride. She stared at me for one stunned second and then started laughing too, helplessly, her forehead falling to my shoulder. I held her there, smiling into her hair, and thought, this is what I have been wanting without language. Not just heat. not just the exquisite danger of her mouth on mine. This too. The laughter threaded through it. The fact that she was no longer unreachable. The fact that I could make her laugh in the middle of desire and she did not vanish from me because of it. Later, when our bodies had settled from trembling into a quieter warmth, she pulled the blanket up around us and tucked me against her as though the motion came from some private instinct she had been born with and merely hidden. I rested my head over her heartbeat. It was still fast. "I'm sorry about the shirt," I murmured drowsily. She brushed her lips over my hair. "I'm not." "You say that now. Wait until you see what became of its moral integrity." "It had none left the moment you walked out of the bathroom in it." I tipped my head back just enough to look at her. "That was a line. You have secret lines." She looked almost shy, which on Ione Halden was so beautiful it bordered on indecent. "I have had secret lines for you for some time." I kissed her because there was no adequate verbal response. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, the rain stopped. The city outside turned glassy and still. Inside, the room felt like the held breath after a storm. We lay facing each other, fingers lazily intertwined on the sheet between us. "I need to know something," I said. She traced my knuckles once with her thumb. "All right." At the reception, Petra. A faint spark of rueful amusement lit her face. "What about Petra?" "Were you jealous?" Ione actually looked offended by the obviousness of it. "Painfully." A delighted, disbelieving laugh escaped me. "You were impossible." "I am aware." You interrupted like a 19th century duke with emotional constipation. "That is regrettably accurate." I smiled so hard it hurt. "Good." "Good?" "Yes." I suffered through Ameline Frost with the dignity of a martyr. She groaned softly and covered her face with one hand. "Leora." "What?" "I should like to go back in time and shake myself." "I should like to watch." She lowered her hand, eyes bright now with exhausted affection. "You really thought Ameline mattered?" You smiled at her. She had just compared a trustee to a decorative ferret. It was involuntary. I laughed again, helpless and light in a way I had not felt in months. Then the laughter faded and something deeper rose in its place. "When you said you'd been trying not to want me," I said quietly, "did you mean because of your father?" "Partly." She rolled onto her back and stared at the ceiling for a moment before speaking again. "Partly because wanting you felt structurally unsound. You matter. Too much. I knew if I let myself begin, it would not be casual." The honesty of that made my throat tighten. I turned toward her, propped on one elbow. "And because," she continued, still looking upward, "I wasn't certain you could ever want me without resenting me first. You look at every room I enter as if I arrived carrying institutional backing and a private soundtrack." I winced. "That is not entirely unfair." "No," she said, "but it also isn't the whole story. You see the polish and imagine ease. You don't see the cost." "I want to," I said before I could stop myself. "I want the whole story." At that, she turned back to me, and something in her expression softened so completely that I felt it in my bones. "You already have more of it than anyone else," she said. I don't know whether it was exhaustion or relief, or the aftershocks of being wanted so openly, but tears stung my eyes again. This time, Ione noticed before they fell. "Hey," she whispered. "I'm fine." "That has never once been a convincing sentence from you." I laughed, watery again. "This is humiliating. I don't cry this much." "I suspect you do. Just selectively." "That sounds like a peer-reviewed insult." "It's an observation." Her thumb caught the tear before it slipped. Then she kissed me once, slow and soft, as if tenderness were a language we had somehow both known all along and simply lacked permission to speak. We slept eventually. Not immediately. There was too much wonder still moving through me, too much disbelief. Every time I began to drift, I became newly aware of the reality of her arm around my waist or the brush of her breath near my temple, and surfaced again in astonishment. Once, half awake, I felt her tighten her hold when I shifted and heard her whisper something so soft I nearly thought I'd dreamed it. Stay. So I did. I woke at dawn to pale light and the sensation of being watched. For one disorienting second, I forgot where I was. Then the hotel curtains, the city skyline, the white sheets, and the woman beside me all resolved at once. Ione was propped against the headboard, hair loose, expression unreadable. My heart stumbled. Morning has a talent for exposing what night can briefly make seem fearless. Every insecurity I owned woke with me. The Alcott Fellowship, the symposium, the fact that we were still rivals in ways that daylight might remember more sharply than darkness had. The fact that I was wearing her shirt and had spent the night curled against her like I'd belonged there for years. "Good morning," I said, and immediately hated how tentative it sounded. Her face changed. Some tension I hadn't realized was there eased. "Good morning." I sat up slowly. The blanket slipped. I pulled it back into place with all the dignity available to a woman reconstructing her self-respect from hotel linens. "Did you sleep?" I asked. "A little." "You look like you were thinking in Latin before sunrise." "That's a cruel assessment." "Is it inaccurate?" Her mouth curved, but the shadow did not leave her eyes completely. "No." Something cold pricked under my ribs. "Do you regret this?" The question came out quieter than I intended. Not defensive. Worse. Hopeful enough to bruise. Ione's whole expression sharpened. "No." Too fast. Too certain. I believed that part. But there was still something in her, some careful distance reassembling with the light. "Then what?" I asked. She exhaled and looked toward the window before returning her gaze to me. "I regret the timing." I stiffened. "That sounds perilously close to regret." "It isn't." Her voice stayed gentle, which somehow made it worse. "We have to stand in front of a national selection committee in 3 hours. We are both finalists for the same endorsement. Professor Sethi will take one look at us and develop theories." Despite myself, I huffed a laugh. That part is undeniably true. "I am not sorry," she said. "I'm frightened by how little sorry I am." The ache in my chest eased a fraction. "I can work with frightened," I said. Her gaze held mine. "Can you?" "Yes," I said, and because there was no point in pretending smallness now, I added, "I'm frightened too." That seemed to matter to her. She reached for my hand and kissed my knuckles once, eyes never leaving mine. "We should shower," she said, and even that sounded intimate now. "And attempt professionalism." An impossible request under current conditions. She almost smiled. Agreed. We moved carefully through the morning, tender and awkward in alternating waves. I showered first and emerged to find coffee waiting on the desk exactly the way I took it, because apparently she could map my preferences in her sleep now. Ione went in next. While she was gone, I stood at the window in the borrowed shirt and tried to steady my pulse by counting buses below. Last night had happened. It had not been dream architecture built out of exhaustion and rain. My mouth still remembered her. My body still carried the warm, echoing certainty of being held by someone who had wanted me almost as long as I had wanted her. And yet daylight insisted on complexity. I knew enough about ambition, about pride, about the fragile weather systems of two women who had spent 2 years outthinking their own hearts, to understand that one perfect night does not erase fear. Sometimes it sharpens it. When Ione emerged, dressed in a slate suit that should have been illegal, hair pinned back, expression composed but gentler than the Ione the rest of the world knew, I was halfway through convincing myself I could survive whatever came next. Then she stopped in front of me, adjusted the crooked line of my collar with 2 careful fingers, and said, "You still do that thing with your left cuff when you're nervous." I glanced down. She was right. Of course she was. How long have you been collecting evidence on me? I asked. Long enough to be incriminated. My breath caught. She looked like she wanted to say more. Instead, she stepped back, and the loss of proximity felt abrupt enough to qualify as weather. At the symposium ballroom, chandeliers blazed over rows of polished tables and anxious students. Panels murmured, coffee steamed, and networking ambition crackled so hard in the air it could have powered a small country. Professor Sethi materialized at the back like a delighted ghost, tie crooked from travel, carrying 2 muffins and an expression of obscene curiosity. "You both look," he said, squinting at us, "unusually intense." "We are always unusually intense," I said. "True," he admitted. "But now you have the air of people who have either solved ethics or destroyed a minor monarchy." Ione took a muffin from him. "Good morning, Professor." He glanced between us again. "Fascinating." I wanted to die on the spot. The presentation itself saved us. Or perhaps it simply reminded me that whatever else had changed, the strange brilliance between us had not. Standing side by side at the lectern, I felt the old current return. Not rivalry now, but something stronger, refined by everything the night had given us. She took the opening framework with her usual precise authority. I came in on the second section, warm and forceful, and felt the room lean toward us. We did not trip over each other once. We built. We challenged the committee politely, and then more honestly than they expected. Ione abandoned 2 of her safer phrases and used the language we had argued over at the window. Betrayed, not diminished. Responsibility, not optics. I watched one selector sit up straighter. During questions, a dean from Hartford tried to corner me into softening our conclusions for institutional viability. Before I could answer, Ione said, "Viability is precisely what institutions cite when they wish to avoid reform. Ms. Penn's point is that public trust does not collapse because people demand too much. It collapses because institutions repeatedly ask to be excused from courage." My heart did something ungovernable. Later, when a venture fellow asked Ione whether transparency could ever be excessive, I answered before she could, citing a case she had once forced me to read at midnight in the library. She glanced at me then with quick, startled gratitude. We were seamless, not because we agreed on everything, because we knew exactly how the other mind moved when under pressure, because somewhere along the line, rivalry had turned into fluency. By the time we left the ballroom, adrenaline had replaced sleep, and I could barely feel the floor. Professor Sethi caught up with us in the corridor, triumphant. "That," he declared, "was what I mean when I use the word formidable." Ione inclined her head. I leaned against the wall and tried not to faint from a combination of exhaustion and the memory of her voice defending me in public like it was instinctive. Sethi lowered his voice. "The committee was very interested. The Alcott endorsement decision will be finalized after the luncheon." Of course it would. No rest for the academically overinvested. He left us with a pat on the shoulder for me, and something like paternal satisfaction aimed at both of us. The corridor emptied. We stood there with the symposium roaring distantly behind closed doors. "You were brilliant," I said. Ione held my gaze. "So were you." That should have been manageable. It wasn't. I took one step toward her before sense returned. Public hallway, faculty everywhere, unstable heart rate. She saw the movement anyway. Her eyes darkened. "Tonight," she said very quietly. I swallowed. "Tonight?" "If you still want tonight when it isn't last night anymore." The sentence hit me so hard I had to grip my folder tighter. "Ione," I said, and every possible answer seemed too small. Her expression gentled. "We have time." We did not, as it turned out. Or not the kind I wanted, because by lunchtime, the world had remembered how to complicate us again. At lunch, while the committee disappeared behind carved doors to deliberate, and the rest of us performed appetite around expensive sandwiches, Professor Sethi drew me aside with the expression of a man attempting discretion and failing, because he was fundamentally theatrical. Whatever happens nationally, he said, lowering his voice, Bramwell will nominate you for the Alcott. For one suspended second, I could not hear anything else. The ballroom blurred at the edges. What? You earned it? He squeezed my shoulder. Your written work, your presentation today, your interview record, it was close, but not because you were lacking. The second sentence landed strangely. Not because I was lacking? Sethi's eyebrows rose. You didn't know? A cold sensation moved through me. Know what? He hesitated, which was answer enough before the words came. Halden withdrew her candidacy 3 weeks ago. She accepted a provisional place in an appellate chambers program in Geneva. Asked that it remain quiet until after the symposium so as not to distort faculty evaluation. The room seemed to tilt. Geneva. 3 weeks ago, I heard myself thank him. I may even have smiled. I have no memory of doing either. What I remember is crossing the ballroom and finding Ione by the window, one hand around a glass of water, expression composed in that beautiful, ruinous way of hers, and realizing that whatever softness the night had built in me was now colliding with old pride, hard enough to spark. You withdrew, I said. Her face changed instantly. Leora, you withdrew. She set the glass down. Let's not do this here. No, I said, too quietly. Let's absolutely do it here, because apparently you've been making life decisions that involve me without mentioning them. A couple of students glanced our way. Ione's jaw tightened. Come with me. She led me into an empty corridor off the ballroom where the carpet swallowed sound and the windows faced a narrow slice of gray river. The moment the door swung shut, I turned on her. Geneva? She closed her eyes briefly. I was going to tell you. When? After I found out from someone else? After last night? After this evening you kept promising as if there was an evening to speak of? Pain crossed her face. That's not fair. No? Tell me what is fair about sleeping with me and then letting me learn from our professor that you were planning to leave the country. I was not planning to leave you, she said, and the rawness in her voice nearly stopped me. Nearly. I was trying to manage something I have not yet learned how to manage well. Which is what, exactly? Wanting me in private while building a life somewhere else in public? Color rose in her face. Don't. Then help me understand. For a long second, she said nothing. When she did, her voice was low and frayed. My father arranged the Geneva interviews in January. I said yes because it was easy, because it was expected, because if I stayed inside the shape he made for me, I wouldn't have to decide anything that might break me open. She swallowed. Then you and I became whatever this is, and I needed one night, one morning, before I told you something that might make you look at me like a coward. I stared at her. You don't get one perfect night with me as a buffer before bad news. I know. Do you? Yes. Her control cracked out right now. Yes, I know. I know I handled it badly. I know you think I made you into an interlude, and I swear to you I didn't. But I don't know how to prove that in a hallway between committee sessions. My anger wavered, then flared again because hurt is ambitious that way. You said we had time. I thought we might. You thought wrong. She flinched. God help me, part of me wanted to take it back instantly. The larger part was too wounded. What did last night mean to you? I asked. Honestly, not elegantly. Her eyes locked on mine. Everything I was trying not to admit. Even if you left? There was never an even if in how I felt. That's not enough. No, she said, voice breaking. It isn't. The silence after that was terrible. Real. She did not try to touch me. I did not let myself want her to. When I finally spoke, the words felt like glass in my mouth. I can't be your hidden rebellion, Ione. A tear brightened in her eyes and did not fall. You were never hidden to me. But I was still temporary to your plans. She had no answer fast enough to save us. I went back into the ballroom before my own composure collapsed in public. The rest of the afternoon passed like a badly subtitled film. We were cordial through the closing panel, polished on the return train, a masterpiece of restraint in a shared cab back to campus, where we finally stood on the wet pavement outside Halden House, and neither of us knew what belonged to words anymore. "Leora," she said when I turned to leave. I didn't stop. That was Friday. By Monday, I had been formally announced as Bramwell's Alcott nominee and had never felt less victorious in my life. People hugged me. Professors praised me. Maribel nearly dislocated my shoulder with enthusiasm and then held my face between her hands and said, "Why do you look like a widow at your own triumph?" Because tact has never been her dominant gift. Ione moved through campus like a familiar ache. In seminar, she spoke to me only when the discussion required it. In the library, she chose tables farther away. The absence of her attention was worse than the rivalry had ever been. It left drafts of me unfinished. On Wednesday evening, Professor Sethi found me alone in the debate chamber, pretending to revise my fellowship materials, and mostly staring at the same paragraph until the words lost moral meaning. "You're brooding," he observed. "I learned from the best." That is either flattering or defamatory. I closed the folder. "Professor, did Ione ask you to pair us for Philadelphia?" Sethi's expression changed in the smallest, most infuriatingly perceptive way. "She argued for you very persuasively." My throat tightened. "Why?" "Because," he said, leaning one hip against the desk, and I quote as accurately as memory allows, "Penn is the only person who tells the truth before the rest of us have agreed it is convenient." I looked away. He let the silence sit for a moment. Then, more gently, "She also asked me not to announce your nomination until after the symposium because she thought anything else would cheapen it. For what it's worth, I have rarely seen Miss Halden do anything by halves where you are concerned." The room went quiet around us. A dozen small moments lit up in my mind at once. The adapter at the lectern, the marked article on the library steps, the gloves in the snow, the way she had known my ankle hurt, the way she had ordered mushrooms for me without asking, the way she had said, "Your point is the strongest one in the room" on the first day we met. Quiet choosing, over and over, hidden inside the rivalry because perhaps that was the only form she believed she could safely let it take. "I thought she hated me," I said. Sethi's mouth softened. "My dear girl, I think Miss Halden has been protecting herself from wanting you since approximately week 2. I laughed, and to my horror, it turned into a sob halfway through. He pretended not to notice in the generous way good professors sometimes do. I found Ione under the clock tower in the rain. Of course it was raining. Some parts of my life have always had an embarrassing instinct for symbolism. Students hurried across the quad with coats over their heads. The grass was slick and shining. Ione stood beside the stone steps in a dark coat, one hand in her pocket, hair damp at the temples. She looked up when she heard me and went still in that old, dangerous way. "I turned down Geneva this morning," she said before I could speak. I stopped halfway up the steps. She held my gaze. "Not for you. Not in the sacrificial, manipulative, infuriating way you would immediately object to. I turned it down because I was using it as a borrowed life." Rain jeweled on her lashes. "I also accepted a placement at the Belmere Public Ethics Lab in Boston. I applied in February and told almost no one because it was the first decision I had ever made that my father did not script." I stared. "Boston?" "Yes. My Alcott nomination, if it went through nationally, would place me in Boston for the Summer Institute before graduate placement." The knowledge moved through me slowly, then all at once. "You didn't tell me." "I was trying to become someone capable of telling you the truth before I had proof I could survive it." Her mouth trembled once, just once. I failed at the timing. Spectacularly. Rain slid cold down the back of my neck. I didn't care. I was so angry, I said. You had every right. I thought last night was the beautiful mistake you let yourself make before leaving. Her face crumpled with such naked grief that I took a step toward her on instinct. Nothing about you, she said, voice unsteady now, has ever felt like a mistake. Something in me gave way completely. I went the rest of the distance in 3 wet steps. She met me in the middle with equal desperation, and then her hands were on my coat, my face, my shoulders, not possessive, but astonished, as if I had returned from somewhere farther away than the other side of a misunderstanding. I'm sorry, I said into the rain between us. I'm sorry I walked away. I'm sorry I kept translating your fear into indifference because it was easier than believing you felt what I felt. Her forehead dropped to mine. I did. I do. God, Leora, I do. Students were absolutely walking past. I know this because at one point someone made a low, delighted sound that was almost certainly Maribel from beneath a yellow umbrella. I ignored her. For once in my life, public scrutiny seemed very small compared to the fact of finally standing in truth. Ione drew back just enough to look at me fully. Rain had made us both ridiculous. She had never been more beautiful. I don't want secrecy with you, she said. I don't want one night filed under regret or fear. I want mornings, and arguments about case law, and your terrible habit of editing my sentences in the margins. I want to know whether you still talk in your sleep when we are 80. I want... She stopped, breath catching. I want this in a way that terrifies me. I smiled through tears. That is, unfortunately, one of the most romantic things anyone has ever said to me. A shaky laugh left her. Then she sobered, eyes searching mine with that terrible carefulness I had fallen in love with before I knew the name of it. May I kiss you? She asked, there on the wet steps in full daylight. Where I can see you say yes? Yes, I whispered. Please. The kiss was rain-cold and warm at once, soft with apology and fierce with relief. It carried none of the hesitation of the hotel room and all of the meaning. When we broke apart, she stayed close enough that our noses brushed. Behind us, Professor Sethi's voice floated across the quad. For the record, I predicted something morally untidy and intellectually inevitable. I laughed against Ione's mouth. She hid a smile in my wet hair. That evening at the faculty reception for the spring nominees, Bramwell did what universities do best, made Triumph smell like sparkling water and old wood polish. I stood beside Maribel, accepting congratulations I could finally feel. My pulse kept reaching for the door every few seconds until it opened and Ione walked in. Conversation shifted the way it always did when she entered a room, but this time she came directly to me. No hesitation, no detour, no polished distance. She stopped at my side, glanced once at Maribel, who looked like she might ascend from satisfaction alone, and then turned to the professor from King's College, who had just asked whether we were working together again next term. Yes, Ione said calmly, sliding her hand into mine where everyone could see. Very much so, the professor smiled. Excellent. And you are? Ione looked at me then, just for a heartbeat, as if offering me the last chance to flinch. I didn't. She turned back and said, with quiet certainty, This is Leora Penn. She's the best mind in our year, and she's my girlfriend. It is possible I will spend the rest of my life recovering from the happiness of that moment. Maribel made a strangled sound into her glass. Professor Sethi, across the room, pressed a hand to his chest, as if personally moved by narrative completion. Ione did not glance at either of them. Her eyes stayed on mine, steady and open and no longer hiding. My girlfriend, I repeated, because some pleasures deserve to be tasted twice. If you'll have me, she said softly. I laced my fingers through hers. I have been having you in secret for 2 years. I'd rather do it properly now. She laughed, that real, low laugh that had once felt like a private miracle, and bent to kiss my temple. Later, when the reception had thinned, and the rain had finally worn itself out against the campus roofs, we walked back across the quad together. The clock tower lit the wet stone path gold. My shoulder brushed hers. Her coat was around my shoulders because she still noticed when I was cold, before I said a word. We talked about Boston, fellowships, summer housing, whether Maribel would weaponize this story against me for the next decade. We argued lightly about precedent and pastry. We planned nothing dramatic, just life, which, after all the distance we had put between ourselves and the simple act of wanting, felt more romantic than any grand speech ever could. At the dorm steps, she drew me close. Rain scent and cedar and all the familiar impossible things that no longer felt out of reach. I was never very good at not choosing you, she admitted. I smiled up at her. I know. And for the first time since I'd met her, there was no rivalry left in the silence that followed. Only the fullness of being seen and chosen back.